All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Shadows Podcast. I'm your host, Trip Bodenheimer, and today I am joined by Anika Jackson. Did I say your first name right?
You did. Thank you.
Okay. I always overthink names whenever I do this, but she is a serial entrepreneur, marketing communications professional, nonprofit starter, and volunteer, and she is the host of Your Brand Amplified podcast. Ma'am, welcome to the Shadows.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here.
Oh yeah, I'm thrilled for this. I think it's going to be a great interview. We were just talking about California before we hit the record button as we are all packed up, about ready to go. So we're going to be somewhat neighbors pretty
Yeah.
soon.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just a
so
couple hours away.
a
So,
couple hours away. I'm pretty excited, but I'm also excited to put you through these rapid fire
oh
questions
gosh.
here.
Okay.
All right, so first one, what is a book recommendation you have for listeners?
Oh my gosh. Okay. That you got to start with a hard one. Because I always go back to the first book that really inspired me, which is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury.
Okay.
Um, yeah, there's a lot of business books that I could think of and other self-help books, but that one, when people ask me this question, is the first one that comes to mind. It's a book where it takes place in the future where books are burned by firemen. So books
Hmm.
are not allowed in society. And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about because how do we learn? Right? We learn through oral traditions, we learn from each other, which is what we're doing right now with podcasting. And in some ways, I feel like we're almost getting back to um, that concept that's in that book.
We'll have that under our resource recommendations. Uh, Music. I love to ask this one about music. Who is the artist or what is that song that is almost like your guilty pleasure? You jam out to, but if anybody else were to come close to you, you turn the volume down a little bit.
I just heard, okay, so my daughter and I started watching America's Got Talent last night, and we just watched the first couple episodes from this season, which I know it's a few months old at this point. But there was a song that we listened to by an artist who'd been on the show named Birdie, and the song is called "It's Okay." And I don't know if I don't know if it would be a song that I would turn down. I might because it's not my typical type of song, but I love the message of it. And it was just really inspiring to listen to. And what had happened on the episode is a South African children's choir had come on and sang the song, and it moved the audience, it moved the judges. So it was just something different because I don't usually watch America's Got Talent, but my daughter was like, "Hey, let's try this show." And then hearing that song, I was like, "Okay, I have to download every version of this song because it's going to be my go-to whenever I need some inspiration."
Very nice. Nice. What is a pet peeve of yours?
Pet peeve is when people say that they want or appreciate who you are for your whole self that you're bringing to the table. But then when it comes down to it, they really don't. They really want to control aspects of
Mm,
who you are. They think that all these things are great, but then when they get into the details, and this can be in a relationship, a romantic relationship, a friendship, a work situation, where people say, "Oh, these things are great and these will add a lot of value to my life." But then the reality is it's taking time away from them or their projects or what they perceive that they need from you. And so I think that's really important. We have to meet people where they are. I say that to myself, but I also think about that when in terms of relationships with people and who I work with or who I'm friends with.
be authentic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's somebody told me one time, you like I'm only good at playing Trip Bodenheimer.
Yeah.
I'm not good at playing your version of Trip Bodenheimer. I'm not good at playing this person's version. And we try to do that so much. We try to, especially younger kids, or when we're maturing and our brains are still developing, we try to fit in to society and start to put on these facades of who we're not.
Yeah.
So,
And it takes a long time to get to the place where you can say, you know what, this is who I am. I mean,
mhm,
it's a constant journey of discovery, I
yeah.
think.
Isn't it such a good feeling though when you're like, I get to be me. I don't have to try or anything like
Yeah.
that. I just get to wake up and do my thing around someone and I'm appreciated. Yeah. Good feeling. Next question for you. You got two tickets. One ticket you get to return anywhere you've been in the country, or the in the world.
Okay.
The next one, somewhere you've never been. Where would
Ooh,
you use those two tickets?
that is easy. Something we were talking about before the show because we both have some connections to Thailand.
Yep.
I would absolutely go back to Thailand. even, I'm not really a big city person, but even the hustle bustle of Bangkok, there
Yeah.
was a vibrancy and energy, and there's a huge expat community and people are just so welcoming and friendly. Not to mention, it's a lot less expensive than a lot of other places. so, so I'd love to go back to Thailand. And a place I've never been that's on my bucket list. It's a toss up between Alaska and Iceland,
Mm,
because I've always wanted to go to Alaska. There's something about the beauty there. Um, and then Iceland, same thing, and seeing the Northern Lights and just thinking about what you hear about the simplicity of people's lives. But also, there's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of really great music and energy that comes out of countries that are kind of have this isolation, and so they have to create. Yeah, they have to do something to stay entertained. And the lovely
yeah.
thing is that they usually end up creating something beautiful that they can share with everybody else in the world.
Lagoons there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we were in Europe, we went everywhere. I mean, we hit the Scandinavian countries, we did Italy, we did we even went out west towards Russia. The one place we did not do was Iceland. And I still am kicking myself. So I can agree on that one. And then final question for you before we get into your story.
Okay.
Dinner for three historical figures who are no longer with us. Who do you break bread with?
I should have prepared for these questions. Who do I break bread with? I would choose Susan B. Anthony. I would choose because I feel like for her, she was at the forefront of the women's movement, but then also today you see her name being used on different for political reasons. So I'd love to like learn who she really was and get past all the political stuff.
Yeah.
Um, I have an ancestor named Lady Mo from Thailand. I'd love to meet her. Her husband was in charge of the province in Thailand way back in the day. They were invaded by Laos, and her husband was not in that part of the country at the time. And she led her people to revolution to take back the country from the soldiers who'd invaded. And there's a statue of her in a town in Thailand and everything. I visited the statue. I have a small statue of her in my house, but I'd love to learn from that experience. Like, what motivated her? How did she be that leader, right, in
Yeah.
that time? And Nelson Mandela.
Okay.
So I have a lot of ties to. I would say, going back to the last question, another place I would really love to go is Africa. I've been to South Africa, but I do volunteer work in Ghana. I've never actually been because it's always like, do I go there myself or do I send money to help with the orphanage and the other things that are going on there? And I always choose that. But I would love to go and really see the people there and just connect with them in person.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you have survived the rapid fire questions. And now that's the tough part. Now the easy part, talking about you.
Gosh.
So tell our listeners about your upbringings. What was childhood like for Anika?
Well, my mom moved to California actually from Thailand to go to school. Back in Thailand, my grandmother had a private school. My mom was supposed to come to Chico State, get her teaching credentials, and go back. And instead, she married my dad and ended up moving us to Kansas. There was a huge Thai student population at Kansas University, but there was also very much a feeling of otherness. There wasn't really anybody else who was half Thai or half Asian. I went to high school in a rural community in Tecumseh, Kansas, out between Lawrence and Topeka, Kansas. And I just didn't really know where I belonged. So I think a lot of my early childhood was about that, like figuring out who I was, where I belonged, trying on different activities, different phases. Um, and I involved myself in every activity. I was that weird kid who's like on the debate team and in the school plays, but also varsity cheerleader who wore combat boots. So I just really didn't fit into any, you couldn't really pigeonhole me. And I think that was partly because my dad was a military brat and he was in the military. He grew up all over the world. So I had this kind of expansiveness to my upbringing, but also the shelteredness of growing up in Kansas and trying to figure out what that meant for who I was. So I got involved in marketing at a very early age. I loved dancing, and
Hmm?
friends and I all managed to get fake IDs that said we were at least 18, not because we didn't care about the drinking or anything like that, but we just wanted to go to places where we could dance and that had good music. And you had to be 18 at the time. Now I know it's some, states might have that, but a lot of places are 21 and over or
Yeah.
teenage. So when I was, I think, a junior in high school, I was approached by a friend who said, hey, some DJs want you to start promoting their events and you will get in free to their events in Kansas City, because they knew I knew a lot of people because I flitted from group to group. And I was like, okay, I'll try this. And I didn't realize that was the start of my career. And so I started promoting events, quickly moved into, having my own club nights, putting philanthropy into some of the club events. And then that took me to Chicago, Los Angeles, and San Francisco for work, and really got me started. I will say, like, my degree is in public administration because I also had this push pull of, do I want to be in business or do I want to be a social worker? I couldn't decide. And so I think being in marketing and PR and branding today, that I work with a lot of businesses that are very focused on doing good for people, whether it's nonprofits or entrepreneurs. So I think I found a way to use communication skills that I learned from having to market and promote events at that early age to figure out how to effectively do that with these brands today.
So a lot to unpack here
Yeah.
with your story. First, being a military brat, where are we all at before Kansas?
Well, I was, by the time my parents met, my dad was out of the military, but he grew up in
Okay.
Aleutian Islands, Texas. He was born in Salt Lake. Aviano, my grandfather built Air Force bases.
Hmm.
So Aviano, in Italy. So my dad grew up living in Morocco, and I think his last year of high school was in Morocco, and then he was in Italy and Turkey, and just very
Tough
international.
spots.
So my
Tough
and
spots.
and out of that, my Caucasian side, right? My dad and my three uncles, they all married different types of women. One married a Jewish woman, which was they weren't my family was not very religious, but not Jewish.
Yeah.
One, his first wife was from Dominican Republic, and she was Black, and then his second wife was Brazilian, and his third wife is American. And then another one married a German woman, and then a Swedish woman. My dad married a Thai woman. So it gave them this different perspective on the world. So
Yeah.
I think I was all,
Diversity.
yeah. And so since I was diverse and I grew up in this family, diversity's always just been part and parcel with my life.
Hmm. What- How important was that for you at such a young age to be exposed to all those different backgrounds and cultures to kind of get you to where you are today?
I think it was very important. It gave me an understanding of issues that affect diverse populations. I
Yeah.
might not be that same population, but I can understand a little bit of feeling other or being discriminated against. Growing up in Kansas, most people didn't think I was half Asian. A lot of people still don't. A lot of people identify me as whatever they are, Egyptian, uh, Latina, whatever, different things. And so I was able to kind of understand different perspectives, but I also faced going to dance clubs and having people who were sharps or skinheads against racial prejudice say, hey, I'm going to go beat up that skinhead because he's anti anything but white people and I like you. And I'm like, why? I didn't ask you to do this. He didn't do anything to me. But then I also have gotten looks from people who didn't agree with interracial relationships. So so I think it really shaped the kind of work I do and the kind of work I want to do.
Mhm.
And it's why I get to work with the people I work with, right? Because they also have a trust factor in me because they understand that I have that empathy.
I was going to ask, do you think it planted seeds, kind of at an early age to the social work that you're doing today?
Yeah. Well, and my mom was a social worker. My dad's mom was a
Mhm.
social worker. My dad was a teacher. So come from a line of like social workers, teachers, and entrepreneurs. So all of
Yeah.
those things kind of went, you know, what are
Yeah.
you going to do with this?
And even what you're doing now at Southern Cal. So
Mhm.
how cool is that to say you're, kind of following in the footsteps and you're not just doing the social work piece, but now you're also a professor. It's how did that fall into place?
I really, really amazingly, I had when I lived in Houston, I helped put on an event for women entrepreneurs.
Hmm.
And the woman who was the head of the event brought in a speaker from USC, and to talk about branding and marketing, and he and I connected. He brought his wife. It was really great. So when I moved back to California, I said, "Hey, I'm moved back here. I'd love to connect, see if there are ways we can work together." And we just always stayed in touch, and he really became a mentor. And so he kept encouraging me to think about teaching, because I love teaching. I love talking to people. I love helping spark ideas
Yeah.
and see that seed in students. I mean, and I work with a lot of graduate students, and I find that a lot of them still don't know what they want to be when they grow up, right? I mean, I'm in my 40s and I don't always know what I want to be when I grow up,
Yeah.
but to be able to help them figure that out and shape their journey and give them confidence to
Yeah.
really be authentic, going back to that, is so important, as well as helping them learn modern day concepts about digital marketing, media, branding, public relations. So Freddie really helped me with that journey when he gave me some great recommendations to people who are in charge of hiring decisions. And I think because I also have a podcast, so I have a platform and I've done a lot of other things, they saw value in how I would teach students. And so I've been
Okay.
doing it since last fall. I've taught a variety of classes, and I really love it.
Super jealous of that. That is,
Oh,
you talking about whenever you grow up. That's what I want to do when I grow up. So I think
awesome.
the time of recording, I have about 3 hours before I teach my last lesson here
Wow.
at in Alabama. But definitely found that's something that I want to do whenever I finish up
Nice.
is teach. So
Well, we'll
um,
have to, there's so many things that we're going to keep in touch with, but that
oh
will
yeah,
definitely be one of them.
we got a little growing list going here. So this is good so far. And so growing up, you mentioned like just this, oh my gosh, like searching for your true identity as to like who you were. And being a teenager is tough because you're trying to fit in, you're trying to conform with so many different groups. What was something you really learned about yourself during that whole period of combat boots and joining this club and that club and trying to figure yourself out?
Mm. I think part of it was, it wasn't always comfortable or easy, but the beauty is the girlfriends and most of my close friends ended up being people who went to other schools, who participated in a lot of this, who were in theater or debate or forensics. And we would meet at competitions, and then we just formed, and then they love dancing. And so we formed these friendships. That is still my tribe today. Those are still the girls that I know I can always depend on, and they can always depend on me.
Yeah.
We might be living in different parts of the world and doing very different things with our lives. But if I am down to my last dollar, I know who I can call. If one of them needs something, they know they can call me. So I formed these really deep relationships. And I think because we were all searching, but we had this other bond of maybe feeling otherness or having other interests than what was going on in our day to day lives. I think it took me a really long time, probably decades, to be comfortable in my own skin and not
Mm.
feel like I had to show up one way for some people and another way for other people. Because I can recall instances in my 20s where I was like, oh, I'm working at this club in Chicago. I can't be friends with these people who are, more preppy or more whatever. Like I need to have the certain image. And that, was doing myself a disservice, really, of not being open. So it's like this weird of like being expansive, but also not letting people get super close, not being as open and being more judgmental towards myself, maybe.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there are a lot of there's a lot to unpack, like you said. But I think it also gave me this idea that I don't have to be a specialist in one thing, which I know which also makes it honestly very difficult to be employed at a lot of places because people want specialists many times. I'm more of a generalist. I like doing different things. I love teaching. I love podcasting. I love working with my clients in marketing and branding and PR. But if I had to take any one of those away, I don't think I would be able to feel like my full self.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. I think if you look at even like, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, I think being a specialist was like something that it had been just generationally, it had been passed down to us from our
Yeah.
parents that you've got to be an attorney and you got to be just an attorney. You got to be a doctor and just a doctor. But if you start looking at more people, especially on LinkedIn or things that they're doing, it's a lot of people, kind of taking the route you are, where it's like, I'm a professor, I'm a podcaster, I'm a VP, I'm this and this, and wearing a lot of different hats. And I think if you look from a mental standpoint at a lot of people who are that specialist, their mind is still searching for other things. Where
Hmm.
now a lot more people are starting to kind of tap into all those different things. And this starts to give you a little bit more job satisfaction when you know that I'm doing three things I really like doing versus one thing that pays the bills and it's okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good kind of paradigm shift we're starting to see with society a lot is people spreading good messages like you are and making themselves happy and doing several different trades now.
And I want to caveat, it isn't easy. I
Yeah.
have part of my story is I, I moved around to different cities for work. I moved from Kansas City to Chicago. Then I was tired of Chicago. I moved to LA, started working in magazines, moved to San Francisco for a job launching official Xbox magazine when Xbox first came out. And before
Oh,
that,
wow.
Revolution, which was a dance music magazine that came with a CD. A lot of fun. Moved back to LA, then got married, had my daughter, moved to Houston, ended up getting divorced, moving back to LA. And this is, we can unpack more of this stuff if you want, but when I moved back here, it was a little bit different than what I had originally anticipated. I thought I was moving back to more security, and I had a place to live, I had a car to drive, but I didn't have a job. I had a company that I'd started in Houston, and I left it. I had to kind of start over. I didn't have child support. I didn't have spousal support. I spent all my money moving. I very quickly had to figure out work. What I was going to do. It took 6 months for me to really land something solid. Um, but in that time, I also found I was still finding jobs where people were like, "Oh, we really only want you to be a development manager for a nonprofit, or we really only want you to have done really deep work in this vertical of marketing." And so I was still finding a lot of that specialist mentality. I was on food stamps. I mean, I really was down. I had to borrow money from a friend to buy a new bed. It was a very different time because I'd gone from having a high of being in a very stable marriage where I 1 year had 6 figures to donate to charity, coming from this very different life where I was chair of a lot of galas. I was in the newspaper regularly, all these things. It's kind of different fancy lifestyle. And when that went away, there were people who said, "Oh, she's not a socialite anymore because she doesn't have her husband's money." But I had nonprofits that still understood that I had value beyond my money because I had expertise in my skill set. And so the nonprofits were still asking me to do things. In fact, they're still asking me to do things, even though I haven't lived in Houston for 4 years. So it was a very weird thing to see some people turn away from me, but other people say, "No, you're still valuable. You're not, it's not just your money," because I did go from that very, very high to low, becoming a single mom, trying to figure out how to do that, feeling guilty about not being in a marriage anymore because you don't get married to get divorced.
Yeah.
But it's just, some things happen. And now we have a great relationship. It's repaired. We're both in great relationships with people that are very suited to our personalities. Our daughter is thriving. And I've slowly rebuilt. I'm still digging myself out 4 years later, but I'm doing it myself, but I really had to go. I had to go, wow, I've never been on unemployment. I've always been the one who helped people, but I have to now be vulnerable and realize, I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional. Um,
It's okay.
that I have to ask for help and that it's okay if I need to go on assistance and get food stamps so that I can have food for my daughter and myself. And it doesn't have to be long term, and I can try really hard to get off of it. And I kept applying for jobs. I kept trying and trying because I knew I had all these skill sets, but because they've been kind of varied, right? It didn't make me the great employee for somebody until one person gave me a chance. And I just said, "Okay, God, universe, I've done everything I can do. I've sent my resume out to a million people. I've applied for so many jobs. My boyfriend was taking me back to Philly to visit his family for Christmas. And so I said, if I don't have something by the time I get back, I'll go to Target or Trader Joe's or whatever I can do I'll go apply for a job that will still give me flexibility to be able to take my daughter to school, pick her up, do what I need to do to be there for her." And on the drive to the airport to go to Philly, I got a phone call offering me a contract position for a PR firm.
Wow.
But I had to ask. I had to say, okay, I leave it up to you. I don't, it's out of my hands. I feel like I've done all the steps, all the work that I could do. And at that point, it was beyond me.
How did you feel that moment you got that job offer after everything you've been through?
I felt seen.
Yeah.
It's really hard when you apply for things and you try and you don't get the results you want.
Mhm.
And I felt like, okay, somebody finally sees that all of these things I've done add a lot of value and that I will, bring everything I can to this position.
Yeah. So much to unpack from just that little bit that you just told. First, for listeners out there, because we do have a lot, probably a large majority of our listeners are military. In the military, the force rate is really high, really low force rate. What advice, being that you've been through that experience, would you give any listeners out there who are going through some sort of separation or divorce with a spouse and there's kids involved?
Um, there are going to be things beyond your control, but it's never one person's fault completely. You have to look at what you did or how you reacted to situations and take a step back from all of that and from be angry, be sad when you're by yourself, when it's not your time with your child. And although I will say now that my daughter is getting older, it's been okay for me to be more vulnerable with her and to
Mm-hmm.
talk about things. But at the end of the day, your children are the most important, and making sure that
Yes.
they grow up to be full human beings and feel that love and support from both of you is the most important thing you can give them. And that's something we worked really hard on. And it took the pandemic to repair our relationship because we were forced to say, okay, how are we going to do this? Are we going to change the schedule since everybody's at home to a month on, a month off? So that way she's not going back and forth so much. Because he wanted to spend time. He has a house a few hours away from LA, up in the mountains. So he wanted to spend more time there. Um, and so we really had to work together and communicate. And I think it also gave him more confidence because he'd seen, after the divorce, I met my ex-husband when I was 23. I hadn't really had adult relationships at that point. So getting divorced in my early 40s, I had to really figure out like, how do you date? What does it look like? You know, I think a lot of times people have a tendency to go out and do all the things they didn't get to do, go dancing and stay out late.
It's
And
not the same as when you were 18.
it's not. And you get
No.
some people don't get out of their system. Some people do. I did. And then I had to really go, okay, what's really important? And it's not that stuff. It's not having my picture in the paper. It's not being validated for external things. It's really, how does my daughter look at me? And
Yeah.
how am I a role model to her? And so the, everybody, all that focus, time and attention that you had to give during the pandemic, and being able to see that I was able to keep getting clients and jobs and work, and ended up starting my own PR firm and having employees and with benefits and all of that during the pandemic. And I think that instilled more confidence in me because, he hadn't seen that side of me for a long time because I was the home, I took care of our daughter, and
Yeah.
I did stuff in the community to create community for us. Um, so it was getting back to who I was before, but
Yeah.
like even before I met him, like I was always a worker, and so I think that, and then some things that shifted in his life helped us really put her first and make sure that her mental health came first and that who she is as a person. And she's very different than I am, but we have an amazing relationship and I love it. So, it's, you have to be really intentional, and no matter how hard it is, you have to spend that time putting your child first.
Love the intentionality piece. And then also, um, yeah, them first, don't use them as a pawn. And
Yeah.
it's huge. I've had so many guests on here who've talked about that and how things have just gone south because they've used the kid kind of or kids in the middle of a dispute. But you mentioned the pandemic. How tough was the pandemic for you between all that you were going through, and now we're all under lockdown?
It was December 2019 when I got that call for that first client. What was interesting about the pandemic was I got referred for other work, and I was supposed to help produce some music festivals for some nonprofits and do some things. And then the pandemic happened, and that client shifted their business model because that client was Shared Harvest Fund and Foundation, which was founded by 3 Black women doctors to help create a system for people who are professionals with skill sets who had student debt and nonprofits or companies that didn't have a lot of money but needed their skill sets. So it kind of was like a volunteer, I don't know if volunteer is the right word, but as a matching system. And the
Mhm.
professionals would do work for the nonprofits or the companies, and they would get part of their student, instead of getting paid, their student debt would be paid off.
Yeah.
So they quickly
Okay.
pivoted the model to, hey, let's use this, but let's do it for the communities that we see. 2 of them were ER doctors. They were not seeing certain communities come to the hospital. A lot of people didn't have doctors regularly, right? Didn't have a doctor they were going to go to. And so they created a system for doing culturally competent COVID testing in communities. So we did it all over Los Angeles. We went to Queens, which was a huge, place where a huge epicenter of COVID. Atlanta, Oakland, different places. And so I started out helping with some of the production side, and sometimes I'd have to be working in lab. If it was like when we were in Queens, we only had probably 5 of us, and then we were able to get some other nurses and practitioners to come volunteer, so maybe 10 people, and we had cars for 2 days straight going through getting tested. So I had to do a little bit of everything, which was good for me, right? But I also got to really show what I could do for PR. Now, granted, it was the pandemic and people were interested in these kind of stories, but it kind of satisfied that community building aspect, the social work aspect, all of the different aspects. And I was really happy and proud of the work. And that client got on NPR. They got onto Amazon had a TV show during the pandemic called Regular Heroes. So they were
Mhm.
profiled on that. And so I was able, from that, I got a lot of other clients who were kind of like, hey, startups, I charge low rates because I'm working from home. I don't have high expenses with this business. I started hiring people. I did end up having a 6-figure business with employees, with benefits. I probably hired too fast. I did hire too fast. I made some wrong hiring decisions. I didn't pay myself as much as I should have. There are a lot of lessons I learned,
Oh
but
yeah.
I also was able to create something. And at the end, ultimately, I feel proud that I was able to employ people during the pandemic, that I was able to help people see that they did have value and that there were still things that they could do in the world. So I would say it wasn't as hard for me because I was working the whole time and I was busy. The hardest part was not seeing family. I had my little pod, right? Like my sister, my brother, and my sister's family and her in-laws. So we had our little pod and we had a couple of friends that we saw. Um, and that was it. But it was really good to, again, grow that intentionality of my relationship with my ex-husband, with my daughter, with my boyfriend, with my family, and with my clients.
Well, I think there's going to be a point in time before we know it because it's crazy to think it's almost been 4 years since the pandemic happened. But there's going to be a point when people are looking back and they're like, especially younger generation, they're going to be like, "You mean y'all had to stay locked up and you had to do this?" And it was a time where you either like really excelled or you just absolutely drove yourself crazy. And it seems like a lot more people that I'm talking to did some really, really good things during the pandemic. So it's super cool to hear that you were able to thrive. You also started your podcast, I believe, during the midst of the pandemic,
Yeah.
which we'll get to in just a minute. But I want to ask you, a couple more questions here.
Yeah.
Uh, you talked about, having to walk away from that job in Houston. How difficult of an internal struggle was that? Because, uh, you know, people get jobs and they're like, okay, I'm good with this job. I don't want to leave this job. I've got this thing. It's got my fingerprint on it. But then walking away from it and starting new can be very scary, especially going from somewhere like Texas to
Yeah.
California, I believe you said.
Yeah.
Take us through like your mindset throughout that process.
Well, I honestly thought I was going to be in a different financial circumstance. I thought
Yeah.
that my understanding was that I was going to get some financial support when I
Mhm.
moved here because other people wanted to move back here. um,
It's a little
and
pricey, California.
it's very pricey. Um, yeah, so I guess I again I as I said I had low cost housing. I mean my daughter owns the house that I live in. Like it's under my ex-husband's LLC, so I
Yeah.
do pay rent, but I pay very under market. I could never afford to have moved back. So in
Yeah.
some ways I was helped financially, but not with cash. And so I thought, and the company in Houston, that was my company. I had a social club called Social Graces Social Club that brought people together who wanted a sense of community. Because Houston, like many places, is a small town in a big city. I was very lucky when I was moving there. I had people who could make the right introductions for me so that I had
Hmm.
community. And also that's just who I am. I'm a connector and collaborator. But there are a lot of people who don't know how to make those connections. So we would help people make connections for business or philanthropy or different things that they wanted to do. And that ended up having a retail component because we had an offer to get a space in downtown Houston at Green Street because they had some empty, office and retail space. They said, "Hey, we'll give you a discounted rent, but if somebody wants to come pay market rate, you'll have to move out, but you can have the space right now." We said, "Okay, great." So we were able to have a clubhouse. It turned into a place that we could incubate small brands because a lot of our members had day jobs, but they also wanted to be entrepreneurs full time. So it was a way for them to test out, to have a place for people to come see what their dream creative project was. And we had just moved into a bigger space. I just spent money painting, redoing the floor, like all this stuff on this new space. And then I moved and I had great people there in charge, but it wasn't the same for them or for me. And when I got back, it's like, oh, I actually can't afford to fly back once a month to deal with things and to hold events for our members. And then with the pandemic, of course, nobody's shopping in stores. Nobody's getting together socially. So we said, we're just going to have to, we didn't want to move to an online only model because that wasn't what was the intention of this organization. So we just had to close everything down. And so, and even then when it was running, it was just surviving. It wasn't paying me anything. So it was hard because a lot of the things that I wanted to do had to be put on the back burner, and I had to kind of just say, okay, what am I doing now? What's gonna be the pathway to having steady finances?
Also, part of that you mentioned food stamps, having to ask a friend for money, and more times than not, pride and ego get in the way, and we're like, I can't do that. I can't. I hate doing that. Uh, well, I don't want to have to put that burden on someone else. And then, like you said, going from gala events to food stamps, there's listeners out there who have been at highest of highs, and then potentially listen to this episode could be at a really, really low point in their life where they are having to make that uncomfortable phone call to someone and say, "Hey, I need help or I need assistance." What advice would you have for them?
Is it okay if I share a story with you at this point?
100%, 100%.
I dropped my daughter off at school. I had money, I thought, in my account. I went to the Walmart grocery out store in our
Yep.
neighborhood because I was like, okay, I can get lower cost groceries there. I can do this, I can do that. I went through the checkout line and my card was declined. I pulled up my phone, realized a bill had gone through that I didn't think was going to go through yet. I thought I was going to get some money coming in. So I said, okay, I can't afford this. And something prompted the manager to pull me aside with my cart. And she said, God is telling me to help you take out, like, tell me what you really, really need for your daughter and for you for this week. And I'm going to buy it for you.
Wow.
And I had not been on that side of things. Like I said earlier, like I
Yeah.
was used to being the one who gave, and I had to accept the help. And I had to be humble and realize that it was okay. It was okay for somebody else to help me. It was okay not to be the one, not to put up that facade, you know. And it was that was when I said, I need to figure out what I can do. I'm gonna see how I can get on food stamps because this woman helped me. She didn't have to, but she saw something and she was prompted to help me. And, I need to be okay with accepting help. I need to be okay with, hey, I need to buy a mattress. Can you loan me a few $100s? Or I don't have any food. Do you have anything you can, bring over. And I had a lot of friends who are, who did help me. My mom helped me, which it's always hard when you're an adult and your parents still feel like they have to take care of you. Um, so I learned probably more about myself during that time than any other time in my life.
What would you
Um,
say is the biggest thing you really learned about yourself?
I learned that we have to be vulnerable. We have to look beyond our pride and our ego
Mhm.
and who we perceive or how we think others are perceiving us as being strong or being this or that, and show that vulnerability and be our authentic selves and say, you know what, I need help right now. I can't do this alone. I can't do this by myself. And know that you can return the favor at some point, or you're going to pay it down the road, right? When you can get to that point, but you can't think about that and you can't think about others. You have to really think about how you're going to survive. And
I
it,
was,
yeah.
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I mean it's not easy. It's not an easy mindset shift to make by any
Yeah.
means.
I was just talking about it yesterday in front of a group, and I said that pride and ego always trip me out because we fight and scratch and claw and burn bridges for pride and ego. But then you look at the risk versus the reward and what pride and ego ever give us, and it's nothing.
Yeah.
It's absolutely nothing. But we fight for them like crazy. And we will get in arguments with people. And pride and ego will keep us arguing and keep us fighting and keep us from admitting shortfalls that we have. But pride and ego usually get you like nights on the couch or uh, some sort of you're over your head in issues because they can't know I'm like this, or they're not going to talk to me that way. Or it always amazes me the older I get to look at those two and see how, like, even as a young kid, like we fight for those like crazy, but they really don't do a whole lot for us when you really think about it.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's also, I feel like if you let your pride and your ego get in front of everything else, you're just going to get the same lessons over and over again. And
Yes.
you're going to eventually learn it and change, or
Yep.
you're not. And that's going to push people away from you. It's going to push opportunities away from you. It's going to create chaos in the relationships you have.
Yeah. And pride and ego stand in the way of the victor versus victim mindset too.
Yes.
And that's, yeah, they tie hand in hand. Well, to get to more of the, some of the amazing things you're doing right now. First, I want to talk about your podcast.
Yeah.
So, was listening to your podcast earlier, Your Brand Amplified. Tell us about how you got that started, and then what was kind of the genesis behind your podcast.
When I lived in Houston, I became really good friends with a woman named Jacqueline Aludo. She has a lot of work in anti-trafficking, and she had a platform called Real Beauty, Real Women. And she saw that I was doing a lot because at that time I was doing a lot with nonprofits and promoting them with brands and that trying to make that connection. And she said, "Hey, I really want to talk to you. Let's figure out ways to work together." And she asked me to start hosting a radio show for her. So when I lived in Houston, for about 2 years, I hosted a radio and Facebook Live show with Jacqueline called Real Beauty, Real Women. We didn't only have women on the show, but we had people come on who were talking about what they were doing in the community, whether as a business or a nonprofit, an event they had coming up, an issue that they wanted people to know about. And then when I moved, we tried doing some recording virtually, and then the pandemic, and it became a little more difficult. Then I had a couple of my clients ask me to host podcasts for them. I said, yeah, okay, I can do this. I then realized that I was getting all the guests, I was doing all the work. They didn't really have budgets because these were not not their main projects. And I wasn't paying myself. I was just paying for my team to do the production. And I was like, oh, I don't think this is going to work. And I also think you have to have a lot of consistency if you're going to really take this seriously. So my boyfriend's in the film industry. He does a lot of editing and filmmaking, documentary stuff. And he said, why aren't you doing your own podcast? You had your show, you have the skills, you love talking to people, just do your own thing. And he said, I'll edit the first few episodes, I'll help you with the music and the intro and the outro and all that stuff. I was like, oh, yeah, if I'm not really making money on it anyway right now, I should just do it myself. So I started doing it. Originally, it's a journey. even though I love public speaking, the first few episodes, I was like, I'm only talking to PR people. I'm asking them 5 questions. And that doesn't work for me or my personality. It didn't really work for the format. So I let that go. And I feel like it's still getting better and better about 200 episodes in.
It's a journey.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely a journey. And I love it. I love talking to people. I love lifting them up and sharing their stories and
Yeah.
things that people can learn from them. And so that's how I got into it. And now I'm up for a couple of podcast awards for best female hosted podcast and People's Choice. So that was really exciting. I'm starting to get more and more downloads. So I'm hoping to get to the point where I can monetize it and make it really part of my day to day instead of just
Yeah.
something that I just love doing. And it's also been a great way to meet people I wouldn't meet, right? Because in this virtual world, now we're connected. And I feel like there's so much we have in common. I can't wait to meet you and your family. And
Yes.
we never even would have known if we hadn't connected through
It is the
podcasting.
ultimate connection tool, the
Yeah.
ultimate networking. And I'm a connector as well. So for me,
Yeah.
podcasting has been amazing. I think the biggest misconception is you start podcasting and you're rolling in money. And I'm like, no, you have to have a passion for it. And it is dedication because social media, you've got to, I go on little like spells where I'll be posting stuff like crazy. And then life smacks you and your other jobs and you end up having to do these. And it's tough and scheduling people, but how cool is that you get to work with your boyfriend and he helps you with the editing and because that's my wife does a lot of my, we'll look at the guests I have coming up and she helps me with
Oh, nice.
questions to ask. How cool
Yeah.
is that to get the kind of collab on that?
Yeah. It's very cool. Honestly, we don't do it much anymore because he's editing a couple of movies right now and doesn't have a lot of time. And I started recording more and more episodes every week. And he's like, I can't spend as much time on this unless you're monetizing properly. And I will say it's been, I'm almost 3 years in. I'm still really not monetizing. I've gotten a few ads here and there, but I have been thinking through that strategy. And like you said, it's really about the passion. And I also had to start being going back to those words, authentic and intentional about what do I want this journey to look like? How much time and money am I willing to invest? And I've been able to do things like I found a really great editor overseas who
Mm.
I've been working with for almost 7 months now, 8 months. Uh, so we have our whole process down. It's a fair wage for him for where he lives, but I could not pay anybody in the United States that amount of money, and I don't have the editing skills to edit like he could. So I've built up a team. Yes, I pay for it myself. That's why I also have
Same
other
here.
jobs, so that I can pay for this kind of stuff. But I also see inroads, and I see that if you're consistent with the podcasting, so at least one episode a week, if not, you're consistent, even if you can't post on social media all the time, at least create some things and have a system for here's how you're going to promote using the video component now, because on Spotify, on Apple, YouTube, they all accept video podcasts or podcasts. Um, and as a publicist, also, I'm seeing that it's becoming a larger part of the PR strategy for people. So I think that we're just at the beginning. Even though podcasting I think we just celebrated the 20th year of podcasting, even though it just exploded, it's going to start getting bigger and bigger. And people are going to realize it's not necessarily about how many numbers you have, although numbers are great. It's really about your audience and who they get to be seen in front of, how their brand is collaborating with your brand and to the right people who are your listeners.
I had someone not too long ago. It was a really cool feeling for me because I was like, I don't know who all I'm reaching. I don't know who all I'm impacting. And I got connected with someone and they were like, oh my gosh, been listening to your podcast for about a year and a half now. So the fact that I'm talking to you is like super cool right now. And me, I'm like, they're blowing smoke up my butt. This is a joke, right? But they were really thrilled to talk to me and they were referring back to certain episodes. And for me, I was like, wow, you really don't have any idea, like podcasting, how many people think it's the monetization. They think it's the want to get all these sponsors and they don't realize that a lot of sponsors only want like 5 to 10 episodes and they give you a promo code. And depending on how that promo code does, they may not re-up you.
Mm,
And and you're not Joe Rogan. So you're not pulling in millions and
yeah.
millions of these numbers. So someone has said, would you rather have, 100 loyal every episode listeners,
Yeah.
or would you rather have, people who are tuning in and getting the promo codes and do it? And I was like, I'd rather have that number that, people are really dedicated and make it a part of their week. And when people listen to a podcast like yours, they're choosing to listen to it in their intimate time, whether it's working out, driving, resting. Like they are choosing to take your episodes are about 45 minutes or so. They
Typically,
they
sometimes shorter, yeah, but
Yes, but they're choosing to take those little slivers of time and make that part of your day. And it's like, if you're doing that and sending a good message, you never have any idea the seeds you're planting with all these people and things they're doing. So definitely go check her podcast out, give it a follow, give it a listen, and also talk to us about your website,
mhm.
yourbrandamplified.com.
Yeah. So my website is by the time this episode comes out, I should have it revamped. But some of the things you can find on it are just more information about me. I'm always happy to connect with people. Um, I will be honest, if you DM me through social media, probably not the most effective way to reach me. Connect with me on LinkedIn or email me through my website. I'm always happy to talk to people about volunteering, about entrepreneurship, about being a single mom, about anything else, that they want to talk about. I love giving that time and making those connections. But I have a program that I've created called Brand Amplifier. And one thing I was finding when people were coming to me for PR services or other services is that they didn't know who they were as a brand. And so they might say, oh, well, I have my logo. I said, your logo is not your brand. Who's your ideal target customer? What are your messages for them? How are you helping them solve an issue? Why did you start this company? Let's really get into those stories and messages. That's what's going to add value. That's what you create your advertising and your marketing out of. So Brand Amplifier walks people through the process of starting your brand from the key concepts, mission, vision, values, positioning, key customers, key messages, all those different things. And there's an online module version. There's a version with coaching. And this is just launching, in August. So, or it's just launched in August. So it's the right time to get in if this is something you're interested in. I'm happy to talk to people about it before they pull the plug. And then there's another step that's like, okay, we'll also do a landing page for you for advertising and a little more work. So kind of like do it yourself, done with you with the coaching or done for you. And if you go to Brand Amplifier on yourbrandamplified.com, you can click through and find out more information about that. And then I also have my podcast episodes and a list of resources and nonprofits that I'm involved in. So I love connecting with people on social media. I'm Amplify with Anika primarily, and then I also have Your Brand Amplified. So those are ways for people to follow, see what's going on, and then the website and LinkedIn.
Right. And yeah, definitely got a lot going on social media. Go over, give her a follow on LinkedIn, on Instagram as well. And a couple of final questions for you. First, I like to ask this question, but you said something earlier that kind of triggered something with me to kind of
Oh,
rephrase it a
okay.
little bit. So I usually ask, about your legacy, like what would people say about you? But with what you've been through and considering, well, like your daughter's been right there by your side through everything. 40 years from now, when your daughter is talking about you, what do you want her to say about your legacy?
Oh, I think what she would say, and this is also goes to my favorite quote, which I don't know
Mhm.
if this is one of my favorite quotes is be kind whenever possible. It's always possible. I think she would say that I really tried to do everything with kindness and that I was a community builder, and that I was somebody who was always very supportive of other people and tried to find the best in them and tried to help them be their best.
Final thing for you. Well, actually, we got one more. If
Okay.
you were if you were to sum up your story in one word, what would it be?
Perseverance.
Perseverance. Yeah, I think I could agree with that one. And final comment for our listeners out there.
Oh, final comment. Sorry, I thought
Mhm.
I was waiting for the question on what my final comment would be. A final comment. You are worthy. Remember that. There's a reason that you're here. and somebody is looking up to you, whether you know it or not. So if you feel unworthy, if you feel down, if you are going through something hard, take a step back, take a deep breath, take time, even if it's 5 minutes, to do whatever you have to do. Pray, take a bath, walk your dog, listen to a meditation, listen to Tripp's podcast, which is always so inspiring. Just do something to, count to 10, whatever it is, to take yourself out of that and remember that you have value. And whether you see it or not, you are inspiring somebody right now with your actions, your words, your deeds. So just remember that and take one step, just one step forward.
I'll definitely take a step forward over, check out her podcast. Her podcast is amazing. Your Brand Amplified, and check out the website while you're there. All of the information you need is going to be located in our episode description. I can't thank you enough. This is
Thank you.
probably the coolest part of doing this is not just hitting the record button and getting these amazing messages out there, but the connections like this. It's super cool, folks. Check her out. Check out everything she's doing, and also make sure you check us out. Leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Us podcasters
Yes,
love to get these reviews. It helps us
definitely.
out so much. And it definitely helps pay off and get the word out there to spread these positive messages to more people. But until then, we'll see you next week with another episode of the Shadows Podcast.